When we examine the world map today, we see borders separated by colors. Each color represents a country. Each country represents a vast land, and each piece of land represents a sense of belonging. These borders seem so ordinary to us that we rarely question why they exist. But one question is rarely asked. Why did humanity choose to divide the world with lines? And what do these lines really mean? For most of human history, there was no structure called countries. There were no maps, no flags, no passports. There were only humans, people living in small groups, migrating, hunting, trying to survive. Land was not something that could be owned. Land was something you walked upon. A group's boundary usually ended where its power could no longer reach, but these boundaries were not drawn. They were simply felt. With settled life, everything changed. Agriculture began. Land was seen as permanent for the first time. Humans were no longer just living, they were producing, and production needed continuity. Planting crops on a piece of land meant investing time into it, and whatever you invest time in begins to gain value, and whatever gains value seeks protection. When the first villages appeared, the first boundaries also began to emerge, but these boundaries did not exist on maps. Rivers, mountains, forests, natural obstacles. These can be considered the first border lines. And for the first time, humans began to distinguish between ours and theirs. As small communities expanded and populations increased, the need for governance emerged, rules appeared, people chose leaders, power became centralized. This was the beginning of states. But a state and a country did not mean the same thing. A state was a form of governance. A country was the territory controlled by that governance. Throughout history, states expanded, wars began. Land was no longer just a place to live, but a way to demonstrate power. Controlling land meant controlling people. Controlling people meant controlling resources. And controlling resources meant guaranteeing survival. Borders were no longer shaped by natural barriers, but by human decisions. Empires rose, maps changed, borders shifted. But what was interesting was this. Borders were constantly changing, but the idea of borders remained. Over time, people began to connect not only with land, but with the idea of that land. Language, culture, traditions. These made people part of the same story, and these stories strengthened the concept of a country. A country was no longer just land, it became an identity. Modern countries are actually a much more recent concept. Most of the borders we see on maps today emerged in the last few centuries. The idea of the nation-state appeared. For the first time, people began to feel loyalty not only to rulers, but to the concept of a nation. This was a powerful idea. Because humans can fight for abstract things, for a flag, for a story, for a sense of belonging. But the emergence of countries was not only about culture. There was geography, there was economy, there were power balances. Some borders formed naturally. Others were drawn with pens. And these lines sometimes divided societies, sometimes created unions that never truly existed. Today, being a citizen of a country is ordinary for most people. The place you were born defines your identity. Your passport defines your freedom of movement. But historically speaking, this is a very recent situation. For thousands of years, humanity did not live bound to countries. Countries create order, they create law, they provide security, they regulate economies, but at the same time they create boundaries, and boundaries always separate something. What is interesting is this. Countries are not entirely imaginary, but they are not entirely natural either. They are a way humans organize living together, an agreement, often abstract, but a powerful agreement. Today there are hundreds of countries in the world. but the human species is genetically largely the same. What separates us is not biology, but organization. As technology advanced, borders became more complex. The internet weakened geographical boundaries. People can now belong to the same communities even if they do not live in the same country. This may be a new stage that is transforming the idea of countries, and yet countries continue to exist, because humans struggle to live in large groups without an organizing structure, and this structure creates a sense of security. Perhaps countries are not born from nature, but from human fears. Fear of the unknown, fear of chaos, fear of lack of control. Borders create a sense of control, but borders also create questions. Can a line truly separate people? Can a map define our identity? Does belonging come from a place or from a story? Perhaps countries are more than pieces of land. Perhaps they are rules humans agreed upon in order to live together, and perhaps these rules become strongest when they begin to look natural. But perhaps the real question is this: do countries exist to protect people, or to keep them within certain boundaries? Because throughout history, borders constantly changed, maps changed, states collapsed, new ones were built. But humanity's need for belonging never disappeared, and perhaps countries are less the result of geography and more the result of human psychology. Humans do not only want to live, they want to belong somewhere. But does belonging always require a line? Or are those lines tools we created to make the world understandable? Because the world existed before humans arrived, and borders exist only on maps, not in nature. Perhaps countries exist not because they are inevitable, but because they are the only system humans have found to live together. And perhaps the most unsettling question is this: if humans drew the borders, could it one day be possible to erase them?